Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming out to the Nicomekl Enhancement Society. And welcome to the DFO Salmon Enhancement Habitat Advisory Board. We're having our meeting here this weekend. And if anyone doesn't know what the Salmon Enhancement Habitat Advisory Board does, we actually represent community organizations that are doing fisheries enhancement in the province of British Columbia here. And so the representatives that we have here tonight are from basically all regions of the province of British Columbia, and we're all volunteers. And the presentation, or the focus tonight, is on fisheries, salmon enhancement, and what the effects are of our development activities. Our main speaker tonight is John Taft, who is a Master of Science student at Simon Fraser University, and John has done the restoration program at BCIT under Dr. Ken Ashley. And John has graciously undertaken this master's project on the effects of sea dams and on the Nicomekl River system. And as the SEHAB board saw this afternoon, sea dams are not beneficial to the migration of mature salmon, either on the Nicomekl or the Serpentine rivers. So without further ado, I'm going to let John present his project data and information to the group, and then we'll have questions afterwards. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Data might be a little bit strong of a word. It's more of a story tonight about where the nickels come from and where it's going. So, data, strong word, but we'll take a look and have some fun. So anyways, I'm John Taft, and here we go. So the agenda today will be quite simple. History of the Nicomekl, we're going to look at the stressors, and then a couple of case studies from work that I've done out in the North Vancouver. There's myself and Ken Ashley and David Harper. And so I'd like to say participation is very welcome. If you have any questions, blurt it out, because if I was in your situation, I would forget what I wanted to ask if I had to wait. So please, let's make this interactive. All right, so for those of us who are on the tour and who are local, this is really not very useful. But what I'm going to be focusing on today is the lower reach of the Nicomekl River from Mud Bay to the Elgin Road Bridge, which is sort of focused in here. So let's go back in time a little bit. First documented in 1824 on the James McMillan's Hudson Bay Company expedition. The Nicomekl to Salmon River and a portage to the Fraser. Basically, this was building the original Fort Langley. And one of the clerks on board, John Work, described the river. So when they found the Nicomekl in 1824, he said, "It appears low and flat. The bay appears to be shallow, and the river is nothing but thick willows, as seen for some distance from the water, where the banks, though low, are well wooded with pine, cedar, alder, and some other trees. There is appearance of beaver being pretty numerous on this river." So this is where we started in 1824. It was a well-wooded waterway, and basically this was the recipe for salmonids in British Columbia. So a little bit more into the history as we move ahead in time. I got a neat little picture here from the Surrey Archive. So this is the old bridge over the Nicomekl River, circa 1880. That's actually the customs office there of the time. And moving ahead in time again, 1898 was the first dike on the north bank of the Nicomekl from the Semiahmoo Road Bridge around Mud Bay. So this is when really the impacts that we see as a legacy today began, 1898. We move ahead in time again. 1911, Surrey Council barred navigation up the Nicomekl and Serpentine rivers. And this is when the Surrey Diking Commission was brought into play. Construction of dams and diking to reclaim 10,500 acres of land. And this was the great industry of farming on the Surrey lowlands. In 1951, not for the first or last time, high tides combined with gale force winds ended up flooding 490 hectares of farmland under 1.5 meters of salt water. The salt residue lasted for years. So this sort of argument is why we have the state of affairs that we have today and why the sea dams are in place. We've got to sort of consider this legacy and this history as to why we continue to have the same problems. It is this fear of having an inundated landscape, salt water that, of course, obviously affects farming. 1960s, rivers pollution caused the closure of a thriving oyster farming business. If you go on the Nicomekl today, lots of oysters there. One of the jokes I think I said earlier today to Jim was, in the 60s, the water wasn't good enough for oysters, but today, and it's gotten much worse, it's still good enough for salmon. And that's a bit of a head scratcher, but we don't want them to close it down, but we need some sort of action. So now we're gonna look way ahead into the future. Estimated flood protection in the year 2100. So now looking ahead, we've got what's been done, and now Surrey has begun to acknowledge that there are future problems. So there's works related to seismic upgrades, sea level rise, and coastal hazards. Many sections of dikes along the Serpentine and Nicomekl River will be too low. So the important point here is that something is going to be done to the infrastructure that's present. And we're sort of at this juncture now where there's an opportunity to consider salmon for once. We haven't done it for a heck of a long time. And this might be the window. And there's big costs involved. As we can see here, just part of this plan, that it's estimated about $464 million to do our remedial work on Mud Bay and Colebrook. And Crescent Beaches needs another $119 million. Overall, I believe it's almost $1.5 billion is needed for flood protection going ahead in 2100 in British Columbia and the Lower Mainland. So a window to do things properly. So looking now, we're going to go right down to the Nicomekl, and for those of us who were there today, we looked across to Elgin Village, and we saw this house, this beige one here, if we can remember, the sea dam's right there. Anyways, this fellow here, this City of Surrey fellow, he's showing the projected sea level rise, median case and worst case, by the year 2100. This is just to drive it home. There are problems, let's do it right when we fix it. Okay, I like to jump around. Let's go back to 1977-78. And let's look at a sport fisheries survey between April of 77 and March of 1978. This was for the Nicomekl, Serpentine, Salmon River, and Little Campbell system. So this was a catch survey. During that period of time, 269 steelhead were caught in the system, 30 of them on the Nicomekl. With estimated costs even higher, or catches even higher, of being 467 within the system, 103 on the Nicomekl. Interesting point is, at that point in time, the only place people could fish were from the bridges. So you had very limited areas of fish, but they were pulling fish. The system brought out over 1,200 cutthroats, 512 from the Nicomekl. The system had almost 800 coho caught, 300 of them on the Nicomekl. So it was thriving at one time, not too far back. Interestingly enough, this paper, by M.J. Burns, he made some interesting statements. Mud Bay is vital rearing habitat. I think that Matt Christensen is working on that in the future to make that true again. Upland tributaries of the Nicomekl, fair to very good spawning habitat. Fry production from several hundred to tens of thousands of fish. Fry and smolts at that time were noted to be impeded by the tide gates. That's main stem and estuary rearing. Spawners held up by gates. So they knew in 77, 78 that in both directions the fish were being messed up by the sea dam. So we have a legacy, we know the problem, nothing was done. So now let's go to another thing, as I throw more interesting fun facts at you about the Nicomekl. In 2006, there was a water quality assessment for watercourses used for irrigation, ready to eat. So this is now sort of, the Cloverdale area produces salad, ready to eat salad. And what they do is the salad is sprayed, cleaned, and ready for human consumption with water from the Nicomekl. Well, what happened was that there was an E. coli outbreak. And so MOE looked into this and what are the causes of this? Well, they concluded that drainage control structures, water quality conditions, and habitat alterations create increased stress on salmon. So we're going backwards here. Recorded fish kill. Likelihood due indirectly, and this is what it was, to nutrient loading from agricultural runoff and other sources. So they knew that the water being pulled from the Nicomekl, it was showing E. coli levels above standard limits. It was recognized again in 2006 that this was in hand with problematic for the salmonid species. So I'm going to dig into agriculture here because I think this is important as we get along a little bit further and look at sort of the layers of challenges that the Nicomekl has. We're going to probably always keep going back here. This is actually supposed to be the Nicomekl. So this is to give you a sense of how close farming is to the waterway. So nutrient inputs have supported heavy algal blooms. I've seen that personally on the east side of the Nicomekl Sea Dam. Situation aggravated by a tidally controlled sea dam, which can inhibit flushing. So basically what we had, and for those of us who were there today, when we looked across on that east side of the sea dam, you could see that sort of sludge and sort of things just sort of accruing and hanging out there. And this is basically what happens when that works its way upstream. Warm temperatures in the fall can reduce the amount of oxygen dissolved in the river water and further exacerbate the problem when salmon are entering the river. So again, layers and systematic problems with salmon. This is going back to this E. coli outbreak in 2006. So basically what we saw was, at that point in time, it was 80 parts per million, I believe, was acceptable levels, and fecal coliform counts at certain spots along the Nicomekl were far in excess of that. So again, 2006, they knew that there were problems with agriculture, nutrients, manure, pesticides going into the waterway, and it got into the human stream due to consumption of salads, and that's why it was noted, but it never went back to the health of fish. In 2008, Keith Tierney put out a paper called Salmon Olfaction is Impaired by Environmentally Realistic Pesticide Mixture. So he actually did an experiment on the Nicomekl, which is great. So what he did is that he did a 96-hour exposure to rainbow trout of the 10 most commonly used pesticides in the Nicomekl system. And he created a realistic concentration to replicate the Nicomekl, of course. And what he observed is that these pesticides, obviously, and in the concentrations that they are in the Nicomekl, harm salmon, and harm trout. And it contributes to the ongoing threatened status of the stock. So basically what happened is that he was finding that the pesticides are basically blowing out their ability to find home and their sense of the intrinsic connection between the olfactory senses on the salmon to finding the way back and moving about were compromised.
Can you tell us about pesticides?
No, I cannot. But if you send me an email later, I will dig that up for you and I can give you the list of the 10 most popular ones. Okay. All right, so now we finally get to what I'm actually talking about today, sort of, as the sea dams, the tidal gates. So the tidal gates are closed and preventing critical fish passage. And this is done because there are 52 water licenses on the Nicomekl, and in conjunction with protection from flooding to preventing the fear of saltwater incursion onto the farming areas. And so this is why it exists, and that's why it's been there since approximately 1911. So let's look at the fish gate for a moment. NHC, Northwest Hydraulics, in 2015 presented a paper on options for allowing fish passage, which seems great. And what they did, they presented 3 different options of pet doors, as gate slots. This one here was the most favorable one, slot number 3. So basically it had a width of 300 millimeters, a height of 1 meter long, and so they were going to put that into one of the gates, and they could raise it up during October, November, when the salmon went through, so they could have somewhere to go. What they found, and most importantly, is that doing that would have no measurable hydraulic effects. Minor water quality effects, potentially large environmental benefits. We're now talking about steelhead, we're talking about salmon. What's importantly here is this final portion here. This is 12 hours modeled with having the gate open and looking at salinity. Now it's a little bit hard to read, but it's around about 4 parts per thousand all the way up to King George Highway. Basically, there's not much water being pulled at that point, and it's fine for farming. They were able to prove that they could have a gate in there. You could allow fish passage so they can get through and do their business, get here, and maybe put the hatchery out of business, and ideally in the future. So another look at this. They did a profile of what it looked like. And again, this is sort of the most important area because a lot of the farming is going on in Cloverdale anyway, is Cloverdale and further. So we get far away from the sea dam as possible, 1.3 kilometers downstream. Again, you see you have a significant portion of that water column that's not affected by salinity. And so we can have a gate, and they know there's water here available for agriculture. Agriculture needs to use that information appropriately. So, and I think one of the things that we have is that farming hasn't really evolved a lot over the years. And I've been told that a lot of the intake from these water licenses, basically they throw them down into the bottom of the water column or as far down as possible. That's where you're always going to find your salinity. We can have a fish passage gate, and we can have water that's pulled for agricultural uses that has virtually no salinity. Everybody's happy. But it hasn't been done yet, and that's unclear as to why. And so I guess it's obviously conversations. So now I want to talk about sort of where we're going to go with this. So here we are. This is the Nicomekl and sort of my area of interest right now. That's the 7-gate sea dam. That's Elgin Village, which in the future will be underwater. And this is one of the neighboring farms. You can see the dike on that side, and then a little bit of armoring and so forth, but very little for interesting vegetation. So we'll sort of look at the stressors first before we sort of hop into things. We have fish passage, which is the sea dam. We have predation and survivorship. This is focused around, be it for the spawners returning, we're talking seals, for fry and smolts running out, that could be depleted oxygen, that could be predation from birds. So overall productivity, the complexity, and this is what we're going to really dig into, is what the waterway, the channel actually looks downstream of the sea dam and how friendly that is to fish. And then we can start cluing together, well, maybe we have a problem there. Climate change, again, I already talked about the idea that the landscape is going to change significantly in a relatively short period of time. So this has to be part of the conversation. Agricultural runoff, so we sort of touched on that. Nutrient loading, manure, pesticides. There have been fish kills within the system, on the Serpentine, on the Nicomekl, due to lack of oxygen. Residential encroachment, we sort of saw that, Elgin Village. We have lands coming out of the ALR and or being converted into residential, and it's not showing strongly enough that it should actually be coming out of the ALR because it's not protecting environmental values. So we have a litany of challenges. We have degradation for well over a century. We have a temporal imperative. And this is, I think, the important and interesting aspect is that we could probably argue all day with organizations on how simple and how easy and how much sense it makes just to have some sort of fish passage to let salmon and let the steelhead get through. But it's not getting done in a timely manner. What we see here on a regular basis, but what we have going on is that right now and today and each season, arguably what we're being told, there are fewer and fewer salmon. So we have a temporal imperative to do something now. You can let people argue and whine about how you can get the passage through, but you need to find a way to protect the salmon now. And I think this is what I'm really interested in here. So where do we start? The first thing to do is we're going to complex the habitat. Give the salmon some sort of protection, some sort of complexity on their way in, and then we can figure out this argument with passage, even though it does seem simple. So here's where the fish are stopped. This is the Nicomekl Sea Dam. Again, this is just sort of looking off of the bridge. And as you see, it doesn't look too interesting right now. There's no riparian vegetation. What we have is largely probably non-native grasses and blackberries, a few trees. On the left, we have a failed exercise in habitat creation as part of the residential development. So it's a poor place. So now I'm going to look at sort of my background, and what's driving the thoughts here is the Society for Ecological Restoration has identified key attributes for successful restoration. Those four being species composition, ecosystem function, ecosystem stability, and landscape context. So we know what the composition is. And as we look further, we're going to see there's an absence of function, and that's going to be worked on. The stability by extension is tied into the function, and it's tied into the landscape context. And I think we've had a real fixation with fixing things on a small scale, and I still do, and I'm still going to promote that. At the same point in time, we need to look at the landscape context. We can make the waterways really nice, but if we continue to have nutrient loading, to having eutrophication, to load dissolved oxygen levels, it won't matter how nice the landscape is within the context of the waterway. So that's sort of important here, but we'll move along. All right, so this is another look into the future, because these are sort of fun. Marvin Rosano and Mark Angelo, BCIT alumni and BCIT presently, and general troublemakers, I understand, put out a paper in there we are, confirmed, 2009, about the relative effect of major environmental factors or drivers of biodiversity in the year, again, in 2100. So they sort of pulled this table from the SALA to 2000. But what the important aspect here is this sort of categorizes where they think climate change, urbanization, and all these sort of this complex ball of effects is most likely going to show them to be expressed. And it's tied into land use, then climate. And so that's, again, if we want to direct ourselves as to what we need to do to work on salmon restoration, habitat restoration, consider where the biggest impacts is, and that's land use. Again, that's residential, encroachment, and agriculture. So that's just a little something to drive me along, I guess. So what do we do? Well, there's certain techniques that DFO's even mandated, and it's basically, and this is, we'll look at case studies in a little bit. This is what I've done out in the North Shore, and I really do like this. That it's, we have, we want to provide cover. We need refuge for the fish. You want to build up the appropriate nutrients. You want to get benthic invertebrates. You want to have plants, an actual functional ecosystem within the area there. And the first thing to do, and if any of us were, if we were here in British Columbia in the 1800s and such, what would we see in our streams, in our waterways, would be just choked, I'm almost certain, with woody debris, with logs that have come down, giant timbers that would just complex habitats that provide cold water situations and drops and changes so you can have nice dissolved oxygen and this complexity. And this is what we're missing in most of our waterways, especially our estuaries in British Columbia, and if not in most of the world. So what we're talking about here is in-stream structures of log cover, root wads, boulder clusters, streamside vegetation. The other one that I do like is actual in-water complexity, be it those sort of artificial reefs, those geodesic domes with holes in it that fish can dart into, or even maybe test out cement tubes as part of giving them somewhere to cover from predation. So let's take a look at where we're going to do this and why we should be doing this. This is the Nicomekl at low tide, and that's what it has to offer fish. It is, in my opinion, much like a moonscape, and when we fill this up with water, that's all they get to work with. And so there is no in-stream structure. We want to have boulders, we want to have wood, and it can be done. Off to the left-hand side today, when we were at the Nicomekl, there's an illegal boat launch. This is another thing which is a stressor that I would really like to see shut down by the, I believe it's the Ministry of Transportation would be involved in that. There's at least 2 marinas down the road here, yet still we have people backing their cars in here and bringing in their large motorized boats. And I've seen some of significant size going in here. There's no need for that we can shut that down and then actually complex the area. Going a little bit further down the waterway, and this is now on the North Shore. This is the farm. There's obviously no riparian zone because it's been the riparian area regulations don't seem to affect agriculture in British Columbia. They've all been grandfathered out. We have some nice lasting riprap. And so basically, again, no complexity at the high tide periods. There's just nothing there. Going further down, we get another sort of little shot here. I mentioned earlier we have sort of uninteresting vegetation. I think arching up through there is some Himalayan blackberry, certain grasses. That again, no structure, no shade for our cold water fish. Jumping across to the other side on the north bank, a little more of the riprap and some of the strange artifacts of the failed restoration done by the residential workings. This again now is coming back closer to the dam, the sea dam on the north side. We have some, this is actually one of the few shots I do have of in-stream habitat, and it happens to be 3 tires, I believe, which is, I guess it could potentially work. We also have the riser that Jim sort of mentioned us earlier today. So this was part of the deal with the development of the Elgin Village, that they were for habitat loss, that they were supposed to create habitat. These were supposed to be, these are some sort of planting that failed, most likely predated on by geese. And this has been like this for at least a few years now, so I don't know how long it's actually been, but I sort of, when I roll this in my head, I'm sort of disappointed that there seems to be no obligation nor enforcement from either the City of Surrey, probably most likely the City of Surrey, to have this job done properly. And that should be, if we take a look at the concept of the polluter pays, this is, the developer has an obligation, anyone, Port Metro, if they have habitat banking, you can't walk away and not have it survive. And so obviously this is another failure on the waterway. So the other fun bit here we have is now bank erosion. You can sort of see undercutting going along here. Again, there's a sea dam. So it's just another option of things to do on there. For the bank erosion on the north shore of the Nicomekl, well, we can't really, trust me, there's significant undercutting here underneath the trees, and these will be going into the water soon enough. This will probably be a problem because I do believe that there's a pathway just on the other side of those trees, and it'll continue working its way down. And again, if we consider climate change and sea level rise, we will see more water, we'll see more effects of bank erosion. Jumping back over the south side again here, a little bit further from the farm where we originally looked at, more signs of bank erosion. So this is fairly common and it's happening on both sides. So a little bit further here, perhaps a nice picture of a heron for the birders out there. And so we're going to pull back now, and what we have again is this absolute absence of structural diversity. We have a boat launch, we have this pile of rocks with sticks in it, and we have the dike, and you can look down here, we have a couple of docks, but there's really not a lot going on. And this is the pinch point here. You come around this bend and go to the bend and come to the sea dam, and this is where I'd really like to see something go in to give the salmon a fighting chance, and then councillors and city members can then talk about ad nauseum on how to put a simple pet door into the sea dam to let the salmon pass. All right, what else do we have here? So this is now a low tide, just another little angular shot. This is the north end of the sea dam. Again, just to beat a dead dog, there's really nothing going on there of fish value other than the presence of water. What can we do? I might be nasty, but I really actually want to make this a heck of a lot better. And this is where my training is. This is where I did my Bachelor's of Science at BCIT in Ecological Restoration. I'm now doing the joint SFU BCIT Masters in Ecological Restoration. This is what I want to do. This is where I think there's a solution to be found. And so we're going to look at a couple case studies of jobs that we've done, the Lower Seymour Estuary and Lynn Creek. And this all comes down simply to reintroducing structural diversity in the form of aquatic and riparian habitat. This is simple, basic stuff, quite frankly. So first we're going to start with the Seymour River Estuary Habitat. North Van. So when this job started in 2013, this is now, so there's the Ironworkers Bridge. Anytime you go over, you'll see Allied Shipbuilders have the big sign to get your orientation to that. There was this long man-made finger that's the result of years of modification of the Seymour River. When it started, it was no better than the Nicomekl in most intents. It was largely a nondescript wasteland where seals, otters, cormorants, I don't want to turn on eagles, but eagles, everyone else was hammering all of the salmonids coming there and going when they were able to pass up the Seymour River to spawn. And so that seemed to be the most important pinch point. And so this is why this job existed. Again, not much here. So this is a low tide situation. It's a nondescript. Again, this is where I originally started talking about moonscapes, but it seems that we can apply those all over the place when it comes to salmon associated habitat. Rocks on the other side, again, really nothing going on there. You've got a little bit of armoring here, which was just to prevent, Allied has their sort of area on the other side where they dredge and bring in the boats to do their work on. And so they've sort of tried to prevent water from going back and forth because, for reasons I understand, I guess. This was the only wood that we found, natural wood, at the site in 2013, which was far and away not enough to actually have a functional ecosystem estuary in British Columbia. Historically, again, just to hammer the dead dog, as I like to do that, as I said, there's nothing going on there. And so this was an overhead view. So you see there's nothing going on. This sort of armored little area here is where it started, and this is allied sort of dredge area, main stem going that way and underneath the train bridge. So first thing that happened was a pilot project. This sort of sold the job and the idea of putting, what it was putting complexity, putting wood and putting boulders onto the estuary, and see that they could last through the king tides. Basically what we do is that we secure these with 1/2-inch stainless steel cable through a log, and then into 1-2 boulders per end, depending on the size of the log and the ballast required based on the forces of current moving back and forth. We use a 2-part epoxy to affix the cables into the rocks, which was good for about 10,000 pounds per connection. We've successfully picked up logs with 4 boulders hanging off of it once the epoxy sets up in an hour. This stuff is really strong, so we felt good that it's going to stay. So the first pilot project was just to come in and put some logs in down on that sort of on the mud bar, gravel bar, and see how they lasted. So that lasted a year. The 22 parties involved in this were happy, and then the project went on. And so further implementation was for further aquatic habitat. We started there, and then what happened is it started to sculpt away these man-made structures. This is probably just more of the same there. I'll give you a nice picture here. We worked, and so what happened was along that armored area that was all torn out, artificial log jams were started putting in, and then more and more log structures. And I believe at this point in time there's over 200 logs have been installed on that site. So here, as I've said, so they took away all the artificial structures, all the Japanese knotweed, all the blackberry. I believe those were most of the vegetation there, and there were some sad trees. Carved it, and then basically what was going to happen is that you have, these are the artificial log jams here, and wanted water to move through and mix and have a whole circulating system. And the argument was that we saw pinks get stuck in there, just sort of doing a racetrack in here prior to the works, and then we would watch a couple otters and seals go in there, and that was it for them. So you wanted to have a more natural function of flushing, that when the Seymour was coming down, it could wash over, and all parts of it during high tide were connected. A close-up on the, can't quite see it, but this is a close-up of one of the artificial log jams. This is buried sort of into the mountain, and it was sort of, the pilings have gone in, there's boulders put in with them, they've been affixed to them, filled with gravel, logs slid in, layer, gravel, and it's actually quite a complex thing that our engineer, Nigel from NHC, seemed to be quite proud of, but it was beyond my understanding. So a little bit further down the line, the islands were done, and then you could start seeing what these structures were doing within the landscape, and nutrients were accruing and things were greening up. We've seen steelhead there numerous times over the last few years, aside from just the salmon that we're seeing using this area. But steelhead seem to be frequently using some of these structures and getting in under the negative sort of spaces of the boulders during high tide. So just another little angular shot of that area. And so what's happened here is you've turned in a completely artificial area into something that looks a little more natural and actually has habitat value from a structural and in-stream composition. Again, a little bit further down, just showing again some of these structures in, and we tried to make, as best I understand, a natural sort of presentation, which is just a big mess of logs, so that all sorts of things can work their way through. Again, a little bit of a close-up there. So, and then after that was done, there was riparian, not riparian, but aquatic vegetation was planted, sort of the tidal grasses. Now, this, going back to my litany about having things not work, there was a lot of efforts and tests done on how to keep the geese out. And so that was, we've argued that the geese don't like obscured vision, and they don't like to be able to they need some room to run and to launch themselves in the air. So even with sort of the structures haphazardly all over the place, we still did a significant amount of coverage through the area with what different goose exclusion testing. And then finally, moving on to riparian habitat implementation or improvement. So the fun part was getting rid of Japanese knotweed. We burnt that one on the left here. This was a colossal, and we ended up digging out the rhizome, which fit in a wheelbarrow. And this is really the problem with Japanese knotweed. So we burnt it and we burnt it, and then we dug it out, and then we burnt it some more, and then we got an excavator to go below the low tide line. We buried it in the salt water, and then of course put gravel on top of it. We haven't seen knotweed since, and that might be, for anyone who is working on invasives, that might be the way to deal with knotweed. It's a little bit tough, but the front end of it is sort of fun. This is now beginning up on the islands and on the crest of the finger of the point. Then soil was brought in and natural plants were planted to rebuild a natural ecosystem. And what we have, this is sort of actually, it's sort of tough to say, but this is the final project before planting. I mean, you can't really see it, but you've got islands here and here. You've got a host of logs. Now, arguably, my understanding is there would have been an interest to try to get more in stream, but because of the proximity to the bridge, caution had to be used, the precautionary principle more so than usual, just because you couldn't risk any logs sort of coming out, hitting tugs or what have you. But I mean, we've seen it used and it's looking great. But there's always challenges. So again, so this is sort of aerial shots and then looking at certain times. April 2009, unmodified. September 2014, it had been modified because basically this was before natural vegetation was going in, and had to figure out what was actually going to stay out of the water. December 2014 was a significant king tide, and most of the work was underwater. This led to some adjustments, and more soil was brought in, and the islands were raised up to the point now where we feel pretty, I think, it's felt that they're going to hold out in the event of any further king tide. So there was a little bit more work done. Most recently, Dave Polster came out, and we worked on stabilizing this bank. So this is on the way in. The actual work that we've been looking at is over here. You'd walk in this way, and there's the train bridge. This bank is horribly undercut and is sort of unraveling slowly. So basically what it was a hybrid design approach to large wood was shoved into the bank. It was anchored on boulders, and then it says a modified brush layer technique used on the upper slope. So logs and boulders, introducing complexity in water while at the same time stabilizing the bank. This is Dave, myself here doing that, sort of shoving it in. And once that was done, and then it got backfilled. So what we had is, you had stabilization through here, you have the root wads coming out. What you can't see is other structures going in. They're also holding that bank there, but of course, you're still going to be concerned with unraveling. And so the final step was, and this might be a little bit hard to see, but, so Dave Polster came in, and he's sort of the master of waddling and direct staking and these sort of things. And so we tried, and the extent here is that, so we stabilized the toe of the slope, and then up here we put in the logs and sort of had rebar and such that driving them anchors into the substrate of the slope. And then on the upside there, we then did direct sticking of it was of willows, and then also planting of an assortment of natural plants. And then it got backfilled a little bit higher up with soil and with trees planted in. And the idea is that given time, and not too much time as a matter of fact, but that the plants will stabilize that slope from above, the roots will go down, but they'll have enough breathing space from salinated water. And then the lower toe of the slope will be supported and protected from tidal influence because of all the boulders and the trees put in at the bottom. So this is sort of one of the ideas that when we looked at bank erosion along the Nicomekl, again, something that could be done there.
On high tides, is it just at the top of those logs on a big, like 24-foot tide like we get up north?
Well, this is sort of the rub, isn't it? But I think that it should be just below these logs, I think, is what I've seen is the average high tides. The king tide, when it comes in, they're somewhat unpredictable. But by and large, you're just not going to see regular inundation, so you're not going to kill the plants. If it periodically comes up there, splash zone or whatever, these plants are now established. They should survive and continue to do fine, even if it does happen periodically.
The logs that were fastened on the other side, on the stick or whatever it is, what was the fasteners we used?
So for the Fastener as in,
Well, they're fixed to the bar with rocks or whatever.
Yeah.
What attaches them to the rock? Is it cable?
yeah, so you drill the log, drill the rocks, so there's a 10-inch hole in each boulder. I wish I could draw on this wall. And then again, it was a two-part epoxy that's
And what sorts of cables?
stainless steel, half-inch stainless steel, yeah. Yeah, and then it's stainless, unfortunately, my understanding that as a worker on these things is horribly expensive, but it's been around, yeah. Yeah,
I've had very poor success with galvanized cable, and if it has
How do you deal with the regulatory issues around doing any restoration in the Nicomekl or any of the other systems when really you have multiple agencies, nobody is really taking the lead in any of the agencies to say, it makes sense, let's go ahead and do it. So what's the approach? Because there's many community organizations here tonight, and I think they're all running into the same problems when it comes to stream restoration, riparian area habitat, protection of streams, fisheries, etc.
Well, I've seen it done. So with these projects, Seymour had 22 stakeholders and people interested parties, and all get along, be it DFO, Metro, number of First Nations, and other such things. What I've learned, at least in British Columbia presently, the big stick is First Nations. Their involvement is critical to seeming to get people to listen to you and to get things rolling. And they have an interest, right? They want, as much as I want salmon back, and I think we all want salmon back in greater numbers, the First Nations want it even more so, as they've been here for far longer than us and watched it all go to hell. So I think the best answer is that there's a lot of patience has been successful, but I think that you've sort of got to stop being nice all the time maybe and actually get people that can at least get that message to the next level, and that might be arguably, as I said, through the channels of First Nations is quite strong in British Columbia.
Did you ever get a passageway at Allied through to the Seymour site?
Yes, yeah. So it's carved in, yeah, and so it's at the high tide, so it doesn't always go through, but you get some flushing now, and water's moving through. So yeah, there's a channel, not quite a channel, but a depression between the very close to the bridge, in between the last two islands that it
Pass through so the pinks can find their way back.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, even though they're not everyone's favorite. But before I get into this, I would like just to say, give my acknowledgments to David Harper. First and foremost, he was the BCIT Rivers Institute project manager on all these in-stream jobs that I've done with him, Lower Seymour, Lynn, McKay, Mosquito, and probably future jobs. Jim Armstrong, who is my sponsor and will be helping me work my way through this project on the Nicomekl, and Ken Ashley, who is my supervisor at BCIT, to help work through this. So that everyone's going to help. I must say thank you, I guess, really.
John, where did the funding come from for the projects?
There is no funding in my project presently. It is. Yeah, no, it's fine. I think that this is sometimes, I think it's a barrier, and I do hear it because it's like, well, who's funding you? Like, nobody's funding me. I'm going to.
No, I mean for the work that they did on.
That is complex. That, as I said, it originally came from.
BCIT?
No, it came from Burrard Inlet. So there was, if we remember, in Port Moody, that was about 8 years ago, an oil pipe was ruptured and it sprayed all over the place. That was ruled, there was habitat compensation monies, and that, along with numerous other projects throughout the Lower Mainland, have come from that oil line being punctured in Port Moody. Yes?
If I can just interject, I'm Brian Smith with Seymour. I'm the one that does the fundraising for that project. So that, the pot money you're referring to did get it started, but since then, there's been a lot of money that's come from many other partners, funding organizations, that we have now spent almost $400,000 on the Seymour.
And it looks fabulous.
It does. I'm ecstatic about the project. Also, you were asking about regulatory. It actually took us over 2 years to get to the point where we did that first experiment with a few logs. They weren't going to go anywhere. That was 2 years of solid negotiations with all the powers that be, right from cities, the city of North Van, District of North Van, DFO, highways, province, First Nations.
CN, we had problems getting site access.
Sorry?
We were CN, I think even we had problems getting site access. Yeah.
The hardest place. But yeah, so it took quite a while to get it to the point of even doing that first experiment.
I'm just sort of being facetious, Brian, because I worked on this for over 9 years on the Nicomekl, just on the issue. And the solution on the C dam here is a $5,000 fix to put a slide gate in.
But yeah, that's going to get in the way of my thesis.
Yeah. So, and the problem with that is regulatory inactivity, shall we say, put it politely. There isn't an agency that will take responsibility and make a decision. Not DFO, not the Ministry of Forest Land and Forest Operation, not the City of Surrey, which is now taking over the Diking Authority. If the City of Surrey would say, we'll do it, they can have it done in a day and $5,000.
With the fish coming up in October and November, and the fields that we saw today as we drove past don't need water in October.
Not this.
So they're not taking it anyhow, is there a?
Well, there's
There
water
is.
islands too.
Oh, for animals, okay.
And then is it cranberries? This.
Well, no,
Cranberries are
cranberries are not using it for irrigation, they're only using it for.
They'll float it off.
fields. It does not matter if it's water's got salt in it. But my study 5 years ago on irrigation, there is no irrigation this time of year during fish passage.
But is there a case to be made that the nutrients coming back would benefit the farmers a great deal? Because those salmon are bringing back all kinds of nutrients that could be hauled up onto their fields. They could get free fertilizer.
Who's going to haul for them though? Because it's been,
What do you have, a jail nearby? Prisons are awesome. Anyone who's been there knows.
I went to the Agricultural Water Sustainability Forum yesterday
Yes.
for the Ministry of the Environment and the City of Surrey, as well as a lot of farmer organizations were there. They were talking about sustainability. And this issue came up in that workshop as well. And they're really concerned about salt water getting in the fields. And I think there's room for lots of discussion, and we'll probably find a solution. I must admit, the City of Surrey stood up more for fish than anybody else at that meeting.
Well,
It was quite interesting that, the meeting was going along in an agricultural tone, and a woman by the name of Carrie from the City of Surrey
very.
stood up and said, you guys, there's more than just agriculture here, you need to consider this. So, your message is getting through, and I think the negotiations are going on, but it was interesting to spend the whole day with a bunch of farmers.
the Nicomekl is troubling because it's so low gradient.
Right.
The serpentine doesn't quite suffer from that, but it's sort of as we sort of looked at those modeling diagrams that there, it can be managed, right? And that's what it can do, and it can take a little bit of work from again both sides. That you can have floating intakes and a little bit of timing.
And I think that you can find solutions that work for everyone. But it just,
Right, and they were talking about monitoring so they could shut things off when they needed to. So, yeah, it's a lot of work. I'm not saying it's, but there's people on the other side thinking about it anyway.
On the agricultural end of it, the water usage on the Nicomekl is serpentine, it's oversubscribed.
Right,
During the summer months, there's virtually no oxygen in spots there.
right.
Because they're oversubscribed in water use. If they don't have a license, they throw a line over the dike, take the water.
And that came up as well. And the other thing that was quite concerning is they want to double the amount of water in the Fraser Valley that they have available for agriculture in the next, whatever.
For
it is.
blueberries.
Well, going sideways, the blueberries take a lot more water than the hay used to, and they're converting the fields from hay to blueberries. And now they need to find the water. A lot of them have water licenses, so then they're doing what you just described.
It's also
It
nutrient.
needs to be enforced.
Also nutrient uptake is that hay and those older crops took up a lot more nutrients, and so you get even more nutrient running through the system, and so it's a double-edged sword with blueberries and such. Is that there's more nutrients going back into the waterway, into the hydrograph, and they want more water, and it's certainly problematic.
Right. Yeah.
It's an issue I've studied as an environmental scientist for
Right.
over 40 years.
Right. Anyway, it's just interesting to hear the farmers talking and all their science on their side and the moral arguments they had. And then to see that it was basically the Ministry of the Environment and the City of Surrey that stood up for fish. And it was pretty quiet except for those two groups.
But I was at the City of Surrey meetings, and you'll have, I know Carrie very well, I've worked with her, and she's great, but then there's somebody else that'll sit there and say, no, because it's salinity, but we've addressed this salinity many times, worked with Nicomekl Hydraulics. I actually wrote the integrated stormwater management plan for the region, the water mainland here, and stream protection is the #1 issue, and that is a requirement under Metro Vancouver's mandate.
Ministry said that.
Yeah,
Good.
and it's ministerial order,
Yeah.
2012, and most municipalities are not following that mandate.
Not yet.
They're not going to. Township of Langley here, I'm dealing with other groups here that's an issue and it's not being enforced. And we'll have that discussion tomorrow at our SEHAB board meeting with the DFO staff about where are they on these issues.
Good discussion to have.
Oh, it will be.
Any other questions? Does everyone like to go home?
Then thank you very much, John, for coming out tonight and presenting, and thank you for everyone for coming out from all different directions. There's a lot of these complex little issues that sometimes there's a simple fix and sometimes there's a huge fix, but there are some fixes while we ensure that we don't wreck the rest of the world at the same time as we're busy fixing everything. We'd invite people to come on up and have a bite to eat and a little bit of a drink, and then you can have a chance to chat and ask any more questions that you might have.